Well, it's a real pleasure to introduce Seo-Young Chu, a professor of English, assistant professor of English at Queen's College, CUNY. Like Chang-Rae Lee, Seo-Young received her BA from Yale. We're delighted to have her back. And she is the author of one of the most important new studies of science fiction, and it has an amazing title. It's called Do Metaphors Dream of Literal Sleep? ? A science fictional theory of representation. This is Harvard University Press, 2010. It's an amazing book. It explores hundreds, at least hundreds of works of science fiction. But she does so much more than just take us through it's so much more than just another look at the tradition. She's really plumbing the depths of science fictional representation, as she calls it, and very provocatively, she places science fictional representation in the realm of realism. And she even goes further to propose the ways in which the analysis of science fictional representation, as she describes it, can expand our understanding of the literary in general. She has many other interests. I promised her that I would give her a very short introduction, so I'm only going to mention that she has written as well on mathematics and Emily Dickinson's poetry and 19th century mesmerism. And her current book project has, I think, quite a provocative title, Against Unification of the Koreas. The paper that she'll be giving this evening will be taken from that book, and it's called Utopias Misplaced, The Cost of Outsourcing Dystopian Poetics to North Korea. Let's welcome Seo-Young Chu.
Thank you, Professor Rogers, for inviting me and for that introduction. It's lovely. And thank you to Richard and Barbara Franke, and to all of you for being here. The title of my talk today, as you can see, is Utopias Misplaced, The Cost of Outsourcing Dystopian Poetics to North Korea. I hope that this title has elicited questions in you, and I'd like to begin by posing a list of questions that I had in mind when I put this title together. What exactly is the meaning of dystopian poetics? What is the relationship of dystopian poetics to the misplacement of a utopian vision? What does it mean to outsource dystopian poetics? What does it mean to outsource dystopian poetics specifically to North Korea? What are some concrete examples of irresponsible ways of subcontracting dystopian poetics to and from places both imagined and real? Is it possible to outsource dystopian poetics in a manner that is conscientious, ethical, and generative? Finally, what is the cost of outsourcing dystopian poetics to North Korea, and are there ways of avoiding this cost? As I will try to show toward the end of my talk, one powerful solution to this problem can be found in the vibrant artwork of North Korean exiles, defectors, and refugees. That is, in the artwork of former citizens of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Let me return to the first question that I posed. Dystopian poetics. What is it? I'd like to propose that what I am calling dystopian poetics corresponds to an aesthetic phenomenon known as the Uncanny Valley. In a 1970 article titled Bukimi no Tani, or Eerie Valley, often translated as the Uncanny Valley, The Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori offered a theory to explain how and why human beings react the way they do to various humanoid artifacts. According to Mori, humans tend to respond with increasing sympathy to a series of increasingly human-like entities until a certain point, somewhere around, I'm going to say 70%, it's approximation, whereupon the aesthetic response drops abruptly from affinity to profound revulsion, before ascending again toward 100% human-like to create what looks, when graphically delineated, like a precipitous valley. For this reason, Mori's theory has come to be known as the Uncanny Valley. Now, Mori's theory is usually applied to robots, puppets, and other humanoid figures that elicit what Ernst Jentsch identified in his 1906 essay on the psychology of the uncanny as intellectual uncertainty over whether something is inanimate or alive. Hal, from the 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey, barely humanoid, and therefore it elicits little sympathy in the viewer. Wall-E, from the 2008 Pixar film, significantly more humanoid, I think we can agree, than Hal is, and therefore Wall-E elicits a strong sympathetic response from the viewer. Frankenstein's Creature, from Mary Shelley's 1818 Gothic narrative. This unfortunate humanoid artifact does reside in the Uncanny Valley. He is, in fact, the very personification of the valley, especially in the following passage in which Victor Frankenstein recounts the moment his creation comes to life. And by the way, before I read that passage aloud, note how the creature's head is oddly misplaced, and that's part of what makes this such an eerie image. Okay, quote, "How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I'd selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful? Great God. His skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. So far, so good. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set." End quote. Now, it's important to note that the creature has been designed to be perfect. But when brought to life, when animated, the creature's perfect design triggers a sense of revulsion. And I'm stressing this point here because it will soon become applicable in a different context. As I mentioned, Mori's theory is usually applied to puppets and robots, as well as mannequins, cyborgs, and eerie computer-generated images of zombies. But part of what makes Mori's theory of the Uncanny Valley so powerful, in my opinion, is its evocativeness, its capacity to accommodate many different kinds of humanoid artifacts, including those that may not be obviously relevant. And one such species of humanoid artifact is the body politic. By the phrase body politic, what do I have in mind? I have in mind a figure of speech in which the type of artifact that we often call a nation is likened to a human body. This is a figure we invoke actually quite frequently in everyday language. For instance, when we use expressions such as head of state and arm of the government. The figurative body politic appears in many striking visual images. Here is one such image from a panel in Marjan Satrapi's 2000 autobiographical graphic narrative Persepolis. As you can see, Marjan is remembering a phrase that when she was a child struck her most by its gory imagery. To die a martyr is to inject blood into the veins of society. Here's another striking image of the body politic that can be found in the frontispiece to Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan, or The Matter, Form, and Power of a Commonwealth, Ecclesiastical and Civil, published in 1651. As you can see, this image shows an enormous crowned figure emerging from a landscape. The torso and arms of this figure, right here, are composed of several hundred individual persons. And what this image illustrates quite powerfully is Hobbes's view on statecraft, specifically the importance of rule by an absolute sovereign, and the importance of a social contract to a strong government. Now, in thinking about the humanoid body politic, I couldn't help but sketch a graph corresponding to Mori's graph of the Uncanny Valley. As you can see, this is a graph titled The Artificial Body Politic. And let me explain what exactly you're seeing here. The y-axis and the x-axis intersect at a place where there is no shape to the body politic. In other words, the point of origin 0, so to speak, corresponds to anarchy, by which I mean the absence of law and order. But the more and more an artificial body politic is governed by rules and harmonious design, the more and more perfectly the union is formed, the more agreeable and appealing the body politic becomes, until a certain point at which the agreement of the social contract and the agreeability of the artificial body politic more or less match politically and aesthetically. I say more or less because in my account of this graph so far, we still haven't reached utopia. And in fact, any body politic designed to be both perfect and viable is doomed to descend into the valley of misplaced utopias, not unlike Frankenstein's Creature. Those societies which are characterized by unnatural unanimity and uncanny conformism dwell in a valley where dystopian poetics thrive. Think of this negative valley as a space populated, for example, by narratives in which too much political harmony is rendered subtly, eerily dissonant by the first-person voice of a narrator who is out of place in society, quietly watchful and even paranoid. An example with which most of you are probably familiar is the 1985 novel, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This classic dystopian narrative is set in the Republic of Gilead, a military dictatorship and brutal theocracy where no one can be trusted, where individual humans have been rendered eerily interchangeable by color-coded uniforms, and where human rights are violated in the most obscene manner possible. Now, before I continue discussing the valley of dystopian poetics here, let me explain why I've delineated utopia as a barely visible dotted line. Etymologically, as many of you know, utopia is a non-place, a no place. Pure utopia is an asymptote, by definition, impossible to represent. Each and every single utopian vision is idiosyncratic. Personally, I'd like to think that this space right here corresponds to a society devoted to the equitable and fair distribution of sympathetic attention on planet Earth. But anecdotal evidence and conversations I've had with various individuals have convinced me that not everyone defines utopia the way I do. But in any case, to return to the uncanny valley of dystopian poetics, why would anybody wish to live here? For the fact remains that there is a demand for dystopian narratives. Recent articles in the New Yorker and the New York Times, among other publications, have addressed the massive popularity of dystopian franchises, such as The Hunger Games. Think that the seemingly perverse and paradoxical appeal of dystopian fictional narratives is very similar to the appeal of Gothic narratives. It's safe to say that the vast majority of us, correct me if I'm wrong, would not actually wish to live in a world full of haunted ruins, sadistic ghosts, and supernatural curses. But the Gothic allows us to enjoy the pleasure of fear, temporarily, and without having to engage our moral faculties. A very similar set of claims might be applied to dystopian poetics. Most of us would not wish to live in a real-life dystopia where everyone else is, say, an automated clone, or where constant surveillance and the ever-present threat of horrific torture and punishment render everyday living a nightmarish exercise in hypervigilance and dread. But apparently many people do feel a desire to live in a utopia, or rather a dystopia, an anti-utopia, that is, without actually suffering, without paying a price beyond, say, the price of a movie ticket. Consumers do take pleasure in experiencing dystopias at a remove, virtually, and in manageable doses. It's one thing, however, to appreciate dystopian narratives inspired by first-hand experiences or by originality, ingenuity, and imagination. It is another thing altogether to indulge an appetite for narratives whose dystopian allure has been inspired by a real-life place where real suffering does happen. North Korea is a real-life dystopia. For almost 70 years, its ideology of juche, or self-reliance, has isolated the hermit kingdom from the rest of the world. Since the division of Korea following World War II and the Korean War, the reality of North Korea has evaded direct representation. Photographs and first-hand accounts of this enigmatic country are relatively scarce. At the same time, the idea of North Korea has served as a strangely rich aesthetic resource, a wealth of images, textures, metaphors, and symbols for a number of science fiction writers and artists. In fact, what makes North Korea especially convenient and attractive as a resource for the making of fictional dystopias is its opacity as a nation. North Korea is a deeply uncanny body politic, one that elicits intellectual uncertainty as to whether it is alive or inanimate, and in fact, there's often uncertainty and speculation as to whether its own leaders are alive or dead. Though the latest news, so I hear, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Kim Jong-un is still alive. But most images of North Korea to which outsiders do have access have been carefully selected and manipulated by the regime. Consider, for instance, this AP photograph of a recent Arirang celebration. These spectacular mass games take place annually in stadiums where tens of thousands of performers dance and march with a choreographed precision that is both sublime and painful to behold. The most prominent humanoid artifact or figure here in this photograph is Kim Il-sung, who technically died in 1994, but who was posthumously promoted to eternal president of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Now, behind this large-scale and highly visible portrait of Kim Il-sung are many individual human beings holding placards that together make the larger-scale portrait possible. Each individual behind this larger portrait is effaced, rendered invisible by the placard that he or she has been trained to use as a mask, as part of this larger, highly automated, mechanized ritual. The fact that the North Korean regime exploits its own citizens in such an uncanny way makes it vulnerable to the kind of outsourcing that I am about to discuss. I'm going to analyze 3 texts that, to varying degrees and in varying ways, borrow from North Korea's ominous mystique to generate dystopian effects. Such texts engage in a process whereby dystopian energies are imaginatively outsourced to North Korea and transformed into aesthetic and cultural experiences of virtual subjugation, vicarious dread, and a sense of how it might feel to inhabit a world of Juche eschatology. The first example, which I'll discuss only briefly, is the retro-chic dystopian video game Homefront. Those who enter this virtual reality of Homefront find themselves in the year 2027, 2 years into a fictional North Korean occupation of the United States. Okay, not sure. Okay. strange.
So I gotta get you up to full screen.
No worries. Does that work? Yes. Thank you. I have a PC. Actually, you know what? This image is amazing. Because as you can see, surveillance is going on right there. Okay. Now called the New Korean Federation of Occupied America, the U.S. is bisected by the Mississippi River, which North Koreans have poisoned with radioactive iodine. And by the way, it is hard to overlook the similarities between this uncrossable Mississippi River and the Korean demilitarized zone. And Homefront is just one of several examples of a trend in which North Korea has been hipsterized in American pop culture. For instance, Vice magazine has recently been posting sensationalistic items about what Vice founder Shane Smith has called, quote, the alternate universe of North Korea, end quote. All right, let's move to a very different example of dystopian outsourcing, much more unsettling than Homefront. And this example comes from the 2002 film Die Another Day. As I've been suggesting, to outsource dystopian poetics to North Korea is to exploit North Korea's seemingly grotesque aura while overlooking North Korea's very bleak dystopian realities. In other words, it is to allow stereotypes about North Korea to perform the aesthetic and cultural work of generating the paradoxical pleasures of dystopian fiction. And what results in the case of the 20th installment of the Bond film franchise is a movie populated by two-dimensional villains that might as well have been assembled, manufactured in, and imported from North Korean factories. Die Another Day, as some of you may know, features North Korean antagonists who undergo racial disguise, and the masking occurs at a molecular level in a narrative that in many ways is set not on Earth, but indeed in the Uncanny Valley. The most spectacular villain in Die Another Day is Zhao, and every single face you see here is Zhao, hard as that might be to believe. Zhao is played by the Korean-American actor Rick Yoon, and his character is injured by Bond in the film's opening scenes when an explosion set off by 007 leaves Zhao's face scarred and studded with diamonds. Subsequently, he undergoes painful gene therapy to replace his original Korean body with the body of a Caucasian man. The manner in which we're given access to Zhao's DNA transplant is, as you can see, quite striking. And what we see here through the eyes of NSA agent Jinx, played by Halle Berry, what we see are computerized medical files detailing Zhao's status as a patient. The juxtaposition of Zhao's original face and ethnicity with his target face and ethnicity provides us with a glimpse into an alternate future for Zhao that will soon be left unrealized and rendered purely hypothetical. Though at this point in the narrative, Zhao has finalized the first half, phase 1 of his metamorphosis. Things are looking promising. As the computer screen shows, Zhao, at this stage in the DNA transplant, is suspended in a patently liminal state. He has been mostly drained of his original ethnicity. At the same time, his quote-unquote target ethnicity has begun to emerge in the form of extremely pale blue irises. Zhao has not yet, however, been thoroughly instilled with the genetic material meant to reconstruct his disguise and his ethnic identity. Furthermore, the diamond-studded scar tissue on his face has not yet been repaired. So as a work of medical artistry, Zhao is crude and unfinished. If the first way in which we are given visual access to Zhao's DNA transplant is through medical charts on a computer screen, the second way is much more dramatic. Bond, having infiltrated the clinic in Cuba where Zhao is undergoing gene therapy, locates Zhao and interrupts the metamorphosis. And thanks to 007, Zhao's body is left, forgive the wordplay, bonded, in a state of incomplete camouflage. In other words, Zhao has become a detainee held aesthetically captive in the depths of the Uncanny Valley. That Zhao inhabits the valley is made evident here by the juxtaposition of the original Zhao with Zhao after his aborted DNA transplant. Now, although his skin here is not quite yellow, but more translucent, and although his eyes are blue rather than Fu Manchu green, Zhao, post-aborted DNA transplant, embodies, I think, an updated version of Orientalist stereotypes of yellow peril. As with Frankenstein's Creature, vastly disparate elements clash within a single humanoid figure. Zhao's eyes look opaque, emphatically artificial, yet the veins and arteries visible beneath the pale and raw skin highlight his condition as a creature made of flesh and blood. The diamond-studded scars, one character calls them expensive acne, evoke sharp rigidity, yet Zhao's larval complexion implies soft vulnerability. The absence of facial or head hair makes him seem almost like a young child, and yet the pronounced brow ridge and Zhao's muscularity and imposing height altogether accentuate his masculinity. Insofar as Zhao is a stereotype of North Koreans, what does Zhao reveal about outsider perceptions of the DPRK? As I've already suggested, North Korea can be thought of as a profoundly uncanny body politic that elicits in many observers uncertainty as to whether its people, its government, its version of communism, its leaders are alive or dead. But what is being oversimplified and exaggerated in Zhao's features is a mystified sense of North Korea's eerie opacity. The mental shortcut that Zhao as a stereotype enables and encourages us to take is a grossly reductive equation. North Korea equals abnormal. And by adding a gratuitous aesthetic dimension to this shortcut, by making this shortcut obscenely uncanny for the purposes of entertainment, Zhao as stereotype obscures the incredibly complicated fact that North Korea, while inaccessible to most of the world, remains a lived reality for millions of human beings. What is the cost of this shortcut? What is the cost of such outsourcing? Well, it's actually kind of complicated. For one thing, audiences, we, are deprived of richly realized human fictional characters and narratives that might enable us to empathize with someone as ultimately, quote unquote, other as a human being of North Korean origin. Much more importantly, however, North Koreans are deprived of the opportunity and the right to be imagined and acknowledged as human beings rather than as uncanny humanoid artifacts. Now, as you might recall, one of the questions I posed at the outset of my talk was, is it possible to outsource dystopian poetics in a manner that is conscientious and ethical? The answer is yes, and the example that I'll be discussing is a novel by David Mitchell. Mitchell draws from North Korea's ominous mystique, yes, but he does so to create powerful dystopian effects in a way that is mindful and ethical in his 2004 novel Cloud Atlas, parts of which are set in a futuristic Korea where South Korean hypercapitalism and Juche totalitarianism have merged to form a dystopian corpocracy called Neosokopros. The very name of this body politic is ingenious. It's ingeniously evocative, I think. It elicits the desire, at least in me, to find partial anagrams and meaningful fragments of words here and there. I'm just going to name a few that I was able to find. Neo, corpse. Cor, as in corpocracy. Near, poor, ears and nose. So the body politic, the flesh of a body politic is evoked even here. Sea, as in the ocean. Open, scar. Core, care, eons, reason. I'd like for you to keep those fragmentary anagram pieces in mind as I discuss the dystopian poetics of Neosokopros. As I've already mentioned, Neosokopros is a dystopia in which South Korean hypercapitalism and North Korean Juche have somehow turned into the same pathological way of life. Here, in Neosokopros, consumers are forced to spend a fixed quota of dollars each month. Saving money is a crime. It's referred to as hoarding. Meanwhile, every home is adorned with a framed Kodak of the beloved chairman of the Juche regime. More disturbing is the fact that this futuristic corpocracy is made possible by an underclass of humanoid artifacts called fabricants. Different types of fabricants are genomed and womb tanked to perform specialized tasks. All fabricants are treated as disposable objects, and they are literally brainwashed by soap, edible soap. One of the main characters of Cloud Atlas is a fabricant named Sonmi 451, who, despite her original design as a subsentient slave in a fast food restaurant, mysteriously becomes sentient. And over time, Sonmi 451 escapes, one might even say she defects from the fast food prison in which she was raised, And she becomes aware that the regime of Juche unanimity that controls Niasokopros is being undermined by a resistance movement called the Union. Eventually, she comes to realize that the body politic called Niasokopros is indeed a near corpse. It is poisoning itself to death. Its soil is polluted, its rivers lifeless, its air, quote, tox-loaded, its food supplies riddled with rogue genes. The Juche's rounds of new enrichment statutes are merely sticking Band-Aids on hemorrhages, amputations, and the corpocracy now smells of senility, end quote. Sonmi 451 ends up as a martyr. She exposes the sick economics of corpocracy whereby all subsentient fabricants are retired by butchers in a factory where fabricant corpses are liquefied into biomatter for new womb tanks where new fabricants will be manufactured. Additionally, quote, leftover reclaimed proteins are used to produce fast food products eaten by consumers in the corpocracy's dineries all over Niasokopros. As she puts it, it is the perfect food cycle, end quote. And by the end of the novel, it is clear that Sonmi 451 is the most enlightened and awe-inspiring character in the entire novel. Now, I hope I've shown that David Mitchell does manage to draw from North Korea's dystopian poetics to create a trenchant commentary on human rights violations in North Korea, as well as on hyperconsumerism and the culture of conformism in South Korea. Furthermore, Mitchell creates a fascinating, compelling, and nuanced figure, Sonmi 451, whose lyrical voice, first-person narration, experiences of culture shock, deep political conviction, and subtle dignity are evocative of stories told by North Korean defectors. Now, in some sense, the final segment of my talk will be devoted to a discussion of two artists who are not unlike Sonmi 451. The names of the two artists are pseudonyms meant to protect their identities. Both Song Byuk and Son Mu are former citizens of the DPRK. Both men were trained as propaganda painters under the Kim regime and defected to South Korea over a decade ago. Each has since received international recognition for his post-defection artwork. In the years following their defections, Song Byuk and Son Mu have been characterized, even branded, as satirists whose oeuvre parodies the style of North Korean propaganda with the aim of ridiculing Juche communism. Quote, after fleeing North Korea, an artist parodies its propaganda. That's what the New York Times states in the title of the 2009 article. Similarly, this BBC headline reads, North Korean propaganda artist Song Byuk turns satirist. Now, while the paintings of Song Byuk and Son Mu are indeed susceptible to satirical interpretation, I believe that satire alone is inadequate as a framework for appreciating the full power of their art. The satirical dimensions of their paintings are complicated by the absence of a clear rhetorical target, as well as by the presence of so many other vital elements. Among them, Korean Han, wistful speculation, whimsy, gusto, kitsch with a North Korean accent, so to speak, sincere pathos, playfulness, innocent of irony, reverence for the exuberance of children, and nostalgia for the sublime landscapes of North Korea. What emerges from this mixture of categories is some kind of new aesthetic sensibility, one to which terms such as satire and parody do not quite do justice, one for which I do want to propose a name, not dystopian poetics, but perhaps something along the lines of a poetics of defection. Now, the difficulty of categorizing the artwork of Song Byuk and Son Mu is intricately thematized in the work itself, which is haunted by figures who exist in states of ambiguous futurity, dynamic paradox, elusive nationality, conflicting ideologies. In ways both literal and metaphorical, these figures are framed as in the midst or on the threshold of defecting from one type of space to another, from one page of history to the next, from one ideological side to its opposite. And as I hope to demonstrate through analyses of the images that you are about to see, post-defection artwork requires from us a quality of attention capable of similarly defecting, so to speak, from a North Korean to a South Korean perspective, and vice versa. We must be willing to defect emotionally from the pain of divided loyalties to, say, the joy mingled with anxiety that might accompany reunification. Now, the first object of analysis is a painting by Song Byuk. It's titled, "Let Me Taste It." To view this image is to defect back and forth between the two iconic images that have supplied Let Me Taste It with its key visual vocabulary, though not its syntax. One, Andy Warhol's 1962 screen-printed artwork, 32 Campbell's soup cans, and two, photography by Eric Laforgue depicting rows of mechanically choreographed North Korean soldiers. Although they differ in vocabulary, Warhol's prints and Laforgue's photographs share a certain paratactic syntax, whereby abundantly redundant figures of nearly identical size and shape self-iterate in perfect geometric formation. Now let's return to this painting, Let Me Taste It. First thing to notice, the soldier here is individualized. The title is not Let Us Taste It, but Let Me Taste It. The can of soup is singular rather than plural, and consequently it is framed as something rare, scarce. Furthermore, Let Me Taste It is palpably asymmetrical. The can of soup is disproportionately large, as if it's taken on a surreal life of its own, one made surreal perhaps by the soldier's hunger. Or it may be that the can of soup is life-sized and the soldier is a malnourished child. At the same time, the intertextual presence of Warhol here adds additional layers of significance. So as we defect from interpretation to interpretation, we hear multiple resonances in the painting's title. Let me savor the soup. Let me get a taste of American consumerism. Let me decide for myself if American pop culture is to my liking and my taste. Let me experience freedom of aesthetic expression. Another thing, too, to notice about this photograph. Unlike the grammar of Andy Warhol's 32 Campbell soup cans and Eric Laforgue's photograph, the grammar here of Let Me Taste It is imperative in mood. This is important. This grammatical mood is reflected not only in the painting's title, but also, of course, in the body language of the soldier's pose. Yet who exactly is the addressee? What exactly is the object of the soldier's slightly indirect gaze? To whom or to what exactly is he pointing his finger? If Let Me Taste It is a satire, then what exactly is the target? The absence of an unambiguous answer gives this painting a vaguely troubling energy, an oblique dynamism, transcending satire or parody alone. Okay, now the final object of my analysis for today is from Boulot by Sun Mu. As you can see, two schoolgirls, one of them North Korean, the other South Korean, seem to be walking side by side while laughing over a shared joke. Yet, first impressions of this painting are quickly modified by closer inspection. The schoolgirl, whose uniform initially marks her as North Korean, is holding a cup of Starbucks coffee in her right hand, and she seems completely at ease while talking and laughing with her companion, whose long hair is adorned by a baseball cap and whose t-shirt is layered over a torn denim miniskirt. Could it be that neither schoolgirl is North Korean? Are they both South Korean? Could they even be Korean American? Is the DPRK uniform a fashion statement, perhaps in a futuristic world where the DPRK no longer exists? Where exactly are they walking? The pale green background offers no clues. Perhaps the two girls are figures from an unspecified future walking home from school in a reunified Korea. Or perhaps they are walking home from school in a future US, where the phrase Korean American has been superseded by South Korean American or North Korean American. In any case, this painting depicts the future of Korea embodied figuratively by these children as already having defected from the current reality of a divided peninsula to the prospect of either a reunified Korea or a U.S. where Americans of South Korean descent and North Korean descent can attend the same schools, listen to the same music, read the same literature, and enjoy the same freedom of expression. I'd like to end by replacing the original title of this talk. As you know, the original title was Utopias Misplaced, the Cost of Outsourcing Dystopian Poetics to North Korea. The new title is The Utopian Poetics of Artwork by Former North Koreans. And finally, this image by Song Byuk, titled Hope. Thank you.
I'm wondering if you've seen the film version of Cloud Atlas, and if so, how that bears out or goes against, or how you think that holds up against the novel and the way that the part of the novel you analyze.
I have seen Cloud Atlas, and I have had many interesting conversations with colleagues and friends about that film. Many people I know are troubled by the fact that some of the actors, for example, where what they call yellowface. I was not as troubled by that aspect of the film. In fact, I found the film to be incredibly moving. And I thought that Sonmi 451's character and her dignity, her soulfulness did come through. As for Neosokopros and the representation of the dystopian corpocracy, I'm not sure if that came across as vividly as it does in the novel. What do you think?
As someone who's seen the film and not read the novel,
Oh, okay.
I was really interested by the dystopia created in the film, and especially kind of like re-viewing the like central dystopian aspect of Soylent Green, but more by like tying it deeply into this like capitalism gone amok.
Right. I recommend that you read the novel, not because it's, not necessarily because it's better. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But I considered discussing the film, but then I thought, well, there are significant differences. I'm not going to spoil anything for you, though. So I'll leave it at that. It's okay if there aren't.
I do have a question. I've never read this work by a guy, Delisle.
Pyongyang?
Yeah, I'm wondering what your opinions are about it. I see it in bookstores often, but after this talk, I'm hesitant, or I guess more curious to hear your commentary on his view of outsourcing in North Korea, and as an outsider coming in and then coming back with information. Do you think that his artwork is, I guess, credible in a sense, almost like a dystopian version of North Korea?
If I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I've read that. It's a graphic, nonfiction, I think, account of his own experiences in North Korea. I do find his account, I have to find his account more credible than many of the fictional accounts that I've come across. And he vividly portrays certain aspects of Pyongyang life that must be unsettling even to a tourist who will probably not starve to death. The hotel rooms seem, he's being minded by handlers, and he isn't sure if he might be being spied on. I don't think you should feel, I would encourage you to check out that book. I would never actively discourage anyone from reading something, put it that way. And that particular book will actually let me, unless it's, I know there are cases in which I would, but I think everyone here is wise enough to know that, in general, what I'm talking about is, this isn't exploitation. This particular Pyongyang, it doesn't exploit North Korea the way, say, some of the video games like Crisis do. And he's a talented artist as well, so his craft is admirable, I think. Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering about genre. So you mentioned a video game and a spy blockbuster and a novel, and I was just wondering whether the targeted audience of that cultural project itself actually shapes the ways in which dystopias or North Korean-like dystopias are conceived. Because I was thinking, with a Bond movie, you have to have a kind of flat villain-like character, whereas with Cloud Atlas, the entire book is sort of imbued with this utopian poetics where somebody 451 became this sort of this figure that's further displaced onto another dystopia in the future. So I was just wondering what you think about that.
I think it's fascinating that North Korea as an idea, as an artificial body politic, as an aesthetic resource, has actually served as a source of inspiration for such a wide range of cultural artifacts, from a James Bond movie to something as exquisite as Cloud Atlas. I think that the range is evidence of North Korea's convenience, the convenience and the allure of North Korea as the kind of resource that I've been talking about. And that's one reason why I think dystopian poetics have been outsourced so frequently and in so many ways to and from the DPRK.
I suppose just one more follow-up question.
Sure.
Can you see a poetics of defection in a blockbuster, for example?
I have yet to come across one. If you have an example in mind.
I'm just wondering, can you imagine something like that? That's the question.
There are many South Korean films, more and more, actually, I should say, more and more South Korean films are addressing the issue of the plight of defectors, refugees, exiles who are of North Korean origin and now living in South Korea. Part of the tragedy is that even these defectors, or defectors isn't even the right word. I think in Korean the word is someone who has gotten out of North Korea, but that's too unwieldy, I think, in English. So for now, maybe exile is the word that I would use. The tragedy is that so many former North Koreans, even when they have settled into South Korea, they still find themselves in the Uncanny Valley, in part because they're not South Korean enough. There's still that logic of the Uncanny Valley. I mean, I'm not going to use a percentage number exactly, but they're at that point where obviously they look Korean, but they don't speak the same Korean that South Koreans do. They have to learn how to use the internet. They're stunned when they see many of them, although this is becoming less and less the case, with the emergence of a gray market along the border between China and northern North Korea. But many of them are stunned to see a cell phone. And they're in culture shock. And they're also, their growth has been stunted. They come from a different ideological framework. I mean, they've been living in a different world, a world that many people have called variously outer space, Mars. There was a famous, I think it was a cover of The Economist that showed Kim Jong-il saying, "Greetings, Earthlings." Does anyone here remember that? Which suggests that North Koreans are somehow extraterrestrials, right? And I mean, I know some South Koreans who feel uncomfortable around former North Koreans because those former North Koreans do invoke that sense of the eerie, and that's so sad. That's sad, and I hope that this problem is being redressed, and I trust that it is.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. So I'm actually extremely troubled by the representation of Korea in Cloud Atlas, and I'm curious what you think about writing about it. So it seems to me that David Mitchell is essentially making North Korea into a kind of exotic costume, for the reason that he seems to, in a way, actively deny the reason of the partition, or the reason North Korea and South Korea were divided in the first place, by in fact displacing a lot of Japanese imperial language into the mouth of the evil Koreans who are using these clones and so on. Specific words and sensitive words like maruta are repeated and used by Koreans, which in my mind is completely inconceivable. So is there a way in which, and it seems in fact that the entire novel, the project is to in some way displace specific imperial facts and make them civil or national, so kind of civil disagreement rather than an imperial international one. Are you troubled by that?
Yes. And that's an excellent point, an excellent question, and I am troubled by the fact that David Mitchell, arguably, at the very least, ignores the fact of Japanese imperialism as well as U.S. imperialism. I suppose when I read Cloud Atlas, I see a futuristic dystopia. I see a critique of both South Korea and North Korea. I see a critique of the kind of obsession with virtual reality and conformism and cosmetic surgery that one might say afflicts the South, as well as a critique of human rights atrocities in the North. But that's not to say that Mitchell should not have been more responsible in constructing this dystopia. The thing about Neo-Sokopros is it's not just, it is, I say it's a critique of both Koreas, but it's also, I think, a critique, an indictment even of phenomena that are just wrecking the world as planet Earth as a whole. What we're doing to destroy our environment. The fact that he mentions rogue genes and talks loaded air and oceans polluted and dead landed. I think that's what makes Neo-Sokopros a body politic that, yes, it is Korean, but I think it's also meant to resonate with larger global politics. But no, it's a really incisive question, and that I'll have to think about it more length. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much, Seo-Young. This was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.